do we have any more questions? You had a question down there, so. Or comments.
Yeah, I guess mine's more of a comment. So I'm an Indigenous male that's young, that has an allied health degree, so I'm a statistic anomaly. But I guess my comment was around the importance of, you've seen the statistics of the dropout rate and things like that. It's important to remember that as Indigenous people, we're not dumb, particularly when it comes to things which we've spoken about. Community engagement is the first thing. Well, these students know their communities better than anyone. That's more powerful than a PhD. So it's really important that we have that, but that doesn't get recognised within university institutions when you're looking at academia and things like that. And then the other part was that cohort, that group sort of mentality. As Indigenous people, we have collective societies. We're not individualistic. So, for example, I've been an IHA student member and gone through them and got my undergrad and decided to keep studying. And one of the big factors for me for graduating was having the student membership where we can work together, talk together, and really, I like the word black excellence. We really aspire to get that, to be the next future leaders, to lay that platform. So I think it's really important within our universities and associations that we think about these things like IHA's student membership and really promote that, because this is what we need ongoing for the future. And that way we get networks. For example, I could come to Canberra and save my friends, you know what I mean? So it's really important that we emphasise that collectiveness and that community capacity first.
Yeah. And this is what iHeart creates, this young man here. So it's a very good thing. For some people that go against him, it's not a good thing, but we're very proud of our young leaders that we've had since starting university and see them go through. We're very, very, very proud of people like Jet.
Yeah, I guess Dawn here again, it's just a comment really, but I think one of the things that we really need to also put out to communities, because we still get resistance from community members around, if you go and study at a university and become educated, you're less Aboriginal. You're no longer a community Aboriginal, you've now become a white fella. And I think that is a barrier for some of our young people who get mixed messages about go and study at university and then they get challenged about still being Aboriginal. And I guess, we need to educate our mob that it's not about being less Aboriginal, it's about being an educated Aboriginal, and that's what we need to do. So I think hand in hand with trying to increase our numbers, and what makes me cross is I've actually heard this coming from sometimes our own academic professions and our professional people who make that comment. So I think this is the elephant in the room, and we need to also address it, that a lot of our community members may be frightened to go and get an education, because then they get, when we talk about membership and belonging, they get challenged and go, oh, you think you're a big white fella now with your education and your degree. Don't come back here talking your big white language, when in fact it's not that. So I think when we talk about leadership programs, perhaps that's something we need to build into the content about how our young people address and manage some of those challenges that will get thrown at them around being educated.
And you're totally right, and I think just as much we have to address racism, we have to address lateral violence. So 100% true. And I think that happens so much in our communities. Oh, well, what are you doing? The crab in the bucket. You see really, really great people trying to do things for themselves. Oh, what are you doing now? You're going to be different when you come back and all that. So I think we have to address it. I will pass it over, sorry.
I agree with that, and I think that is a real issue in our community, and I guess we just have to, us older ones, have to show leadership too, and strength and support for our young up-and-comings and be there to support them. That will happen. Sometimes there's not much we can do about it, but if we're there to support our younger ones coming up and put some protective networks about them and to be gentle with each other, to make sure that we enact the change we want to see in others. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. So I think that we probably need to hopefully have the community challenge itself, but at the same time I think there'll be instances where there's not much we can do about it, and we will be the strength that we need and our young people need.
Yeah. Thanks. And I think time is really something that will heal the community, and the more times that we can get out and work with the communities and engage with the communities, be they rural or urban or remote, the better off people will understand, because I know particularly in remote and rural areas often there's been poor experiences with health professionals, and that's turned people off, and more and more we've got to get the community to understand the value of having our people. They want it. We get told all the time that they want to see their own mob, but then when we get up there, there's also that tall poppy, lateral violence. So it's an ongoing issue that we all have to address.
Especially for us, our elders, our leaders, we go away and we get educated. We come back, we get told to keep on. You're too educated to come back here and work in a health field. So I don't know where I'm sitting in that space, because I thought I'm going away to get an education, come back to help my people, my mom, my family. But you've got your elders who work in these health professions who are saying, they're useless, that we're useless. Having a uni degree is useless. So I don't know how we talk to our men, and it's men that are putting us down. Back in the Midwest.
Yeah. No, there's no single answer, and I think keeping the information flowing about how we are achieving. You look at things like the Charlie Perkins Trust. We've now had 28 out of 28 people who've started at Oxford and Cambridge complete. The two top universities, or at least one top university in the world. We're getting PhDs and so forth, and masters graduates coming back. They're the most prestigious degrees they can get. So I think it's increasing awareness, but there's still a lot that needs to happen at the grassroots. And and this is where IHA, what is 1,600 members? That's nothing out of a population of 700,000. So we're early days in a long, in many ways, but we've got to be very conscious of those sort of feedback loops and keep on working on them. So what other questions? Bo Rambaldini. Oh.
Yeah, Bo Rambaldini from the Poche Centre in Sydney. Look, that's not my experience in seeing that young people coming and getting educated and getting their skills up so they can go back and help their families. I find that some of the places that we work, they're very proud and they're accepted by the community. The doctors do a marvellous job in the hospital, but when they go back home, it's the people that work in allied health that actually get those people up on their feet and get them moving and get them part of the community again. They're the ones that the people have had knee replacements or other issues that impact on their movements. They're the ones that work very hard, and from my experience, I found that listening and seeing what we do in Sydney and the areas around New South Wales, we're getting a great outcome, and people are coming back and getting more qualifications to get more skilled up to do things in other areas. And I think that because of what we do, I think that we've got to remember that I think it's Nacho's got this definition of it's not only the physical well-being of a body, it's also the social and emotional well-being of the body. And we have to have this whole holistic approach to try and improve not only the human being but also the whole body as well and the whole community. I've been working in health for over a long period of time, and there's been a lot of great strategies written to improve the quality of life and the health of my people. And if we started to implement some of those, we'd be really go very close to working towards closing that gap. But what we find is there's only really two things, or maybe three things, that really change in those strategies, and that's the date and the author. And the other one might be the artwork on the cover.
Mm.
And very true, Bo, around, we just, and our definition's similar with IHA. It's not about body parts. It's about social emotional wellbeing. It's about holistic health. It's about so many other things that we don't see in mainstream.
My name is Joe Tighe from the Human Rights Commission Close the Gap campaign. Kind of following on from what Bo said, I'm going to ask the panel if they have a crystal ball. The political context is changing a bit. We're hearing a lot about the coalition of peaks finally being equal partners at a negotiating table. It's a long time since Tom's 2005 social justice report, which led to the Close the Gap campaign. We've had the benefit of amazing benefactors like the Poche family to come in and step in where government have not stepped in for 2.5% of the population. So I just really want an open question around how hopeful or optimistic the panel are around the future negotiations, around what's going to change. The Prime Minister's report on Closing the Gap talks about radical change. So I just really want to get a view of what your thoughts are on that.
Because I'll just take over otherwise.
So, those who know me won't be surprised to hear me say I am optimistic. Every time I meet one of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health students, I'm optimistic because they're succeeding and they're going to make a difference. And they're well supported by IHA, and we are seeing them come through in increasing numbers and graduating. And I think the point was well made that we, the universities, are the ones who need to change, not the students.
Look, I think there's great change. Like I said when I did my speech, my presentation earlier, I think when I was young and going to uni, it's a different world, totally different world, and a different engagement. There's been stolen generations wasn't talked about when I was a student, you know. Now we've been there, done that, and still, you know, knowing that we have to heal it. So I think there's great change happening. I'd like to see one day where we're all equal and valued, that your Aboriginality isn't, it's taken for granted and respected and valued, and you're given the cultural space to practice it, as all people are given respect and the cultural space to respect whatever cultural background they have, where it is a big mixing pot of richness and diversity, where you don't have to fight it all the time, which is our situation now, and that is reflected. I'm not a politician, so I might be, you know, it might be totally pie in the sky stuff here, but where that's reflected somehow in our political process. But for all people, not just for us. I mean, our fight is, and our struggle is for us right now, but that's what I'd like to see in the future. And when people have said to me, oh, why do you want an Indigenous and Aboriginal psychology? Why don't you have a Vietnamese psychology? I say, yeah, why not? You know, we have the room for much diversity. So mine's probably, you know, like in my grandchildren's time or something like that. But maybe not, because I never thought we'd see elders in residence at universities. That's amazing. You think about it. Having elders in residence, such respect, and I think that's really fantastic. I could not have imagined that 10 years ago. So I am Pollyanna as well. We're the Pollyanna gang, but it's up to you two to be, you know, challenging now. Critical thinking.
I'm always, everyone that knows me knows that my cup's always overflowing, and I'm very Pollyanna. I think especially with the Coalition of Peaks, and if people aren't sort of aware of that, you can look it up or ask Joel, and, you know, Close the Gap, the refresh and looking at the targets, and Aboriginal people are involved in that hasn't happened before. So I think there is, you know, a lot of interest, especially with IHA getting funding for the academy, things like that might, to us it's very big, to other people it's only small, but government's looking at, well, okay, maybe IHA could do a good job at this, and which we will, and let's give them some funding to lead this. So I think that there is improvement. We've got a long way to go, but there is improvement happening.
Okay.
I just want to say something from a slightly different perspective, but still very, very optimistic. When Greg and I started this project 10 years ago and thought we will not see change in our lifetime. We will see change probably in our grandchildren's lifetime. We can't believe the change that we've seen. We can't believe that this actually works, because not that we just thought that it wouldn't, but the dynamic aspect of people like Paul and people like Lenny and people like Colleen in Alice, in all of you. You've created this change. What you were saying earlier about, and Lenny, I heard what you said, but I come from a country that right now makes my heart sink a bit. And we had the first black president of the United States that was called a white boy because he was beautifully educated, gorgeous, wanted to create change and equality, and we have racism rampant in the United States, which did not allow him to be the best that he could be. But does that stop us? Does that make us more responsible? You better believe it. And that's why we're sitting here today and what we're doing today, because we're doing something about it, one person at a time. You take Paul, because that young man makes my heart sing. So there you go.
Thank you.
Your cultural responsive framework is really good. I just want to let you know I use it like a Bible. And I'll just show Heath some of the stuff that you were talking about here. So I think that's a good framework that everyone should have a look at.
Thank you very much. We've worked out, like I said, our CEO, a lot of this comes out of her head. Very, very clever woman. And it's about the action. We can't just have cultural safety and have the knowing. It's about the doing. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, that's Petra here from the University of Canberra. Thank you so much for your inspiring talks, and it's fantastic the change we have been seeing in that space. Now, my question is there a space for traditional Indigenous medicine or spiritual healing? And how could we support that as universities and recognize that knowledge which is already in communities and in many Indigenous peoples, and particularly in the medicine plants, but also in the spiritual realm?
Actually, I think Indigenous Australia is in a great, renaissance or a cultural renaissance where we're reclaiming a lot of cultural ways. And these are dynamic practices too, but certainly at the suicide prevention conferences, both in Alice Springs and in Perth, we had a team of psychologists, social workers, mental health professionals and Ngangkari healers present, and they were providing support for our participants. So I think we had 16 Aboriginal mental health professionals and about 4 Ngangkaris available. Our Million Minds grant, that one of the streams of research will be to start very carefully and knowing our place as well, to explore how Ngangkaris can be how cultural healers can be part of a mental health system. It is happening in Western Australia in the state mental health system under Michael Mitchell, but we need to try and encourage, and our legislation in Western Australia says that cultural healers need to be a part of diagnosis and treatment, but we will be exploring that further, and certainly the leader of that stream is Professor Helen Milroy, who has very strong ties with cultural healers, and that's going to be really exciting. I think that it's not our place to describe or to judge it, but it'll be led by healers themselves, I imagine.
And at our conference, we have traditional healers. Ngangkaris come to our conference also. And the other thing around traditional foods, before colonisation, there was no known diseases for Aboriginal people. So as a nutritionist, I would love to see traditional foods come back in. But I'm not sure, in my lifetime I'll see it. But there is a lot around that at the moment happening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian Walker, University of Canberra. Perhaps following on a little bit from Petra's question, I've noticed that the allied health professions themselves have not really received a lot of attention today. And I wonder whether there is space for debate about whether the professions themselves, as professional associations, bodies, need to change, and whether perhaps even there's an argument for introducing different sorts of allied health professions. We've heard about the importance of social work, at least partly because it cuts across lots of different areas of activity. I wonder if there's any thoughts about such things.
Okay, sorry, I keep on talking, but no, the disciplines themselves have to change. Certainly that's been a struggle we've had in psychology. Ian, as you well know, being a psychologist, we do need to challenge them, not only for Indigenous people or culturally diverse people, but for everyone as well. I think that sometimes we build up knowledge systems and they become outdated, and there's a lack of inclusivity. So we do need to start challenge that, and that has been happening. So I think through our professional bodies, we can bring about some change. I think, there's certainly a criteria in psychology that there should, all undergraduate psychologists should have some exposure to Indigenous studies. Some people are getting away with doing a 1-hour lecture. Others are doing whole units of cultural immersion. And over time, we will increase that. So I think curriculum in 10 to 20 years' time, or hope anyway, will be quite different, and we need to demand change, because that is the way of the world, how we're going now, and it is about respect, inclusion and valuing different cultures.
But Eve also ran the cultural competency training for psychs.
Yeah, also, we call it cultural respect training now, but there's IHA has the framework, but IEPA has been doing considerable training, cultural responsiveness training with psychologists as well, and we need to get that going again too. That's sort of petered off. People have gotten busy. Maybe the programs become outdated, so we need to renew that, update it, and start offering it out again, and keep our disciplined bodies and professional entities encourage them to bring about the change too. Psychology sometimes is quite rigid, but one of the highlights of my life as a psychologist is when the APS, Australian Psych Society, delivered an apology to Aboriginal people. That was amazing. We had all Aboriginal people in the audience get up on stage, and the APS delivered their apology. And people were crying, and it was absolutely fantastic. And we found out later that there were some people in the technicians who were doing the sound system who were Aboriginal, and they weren't psychologists, but they loved it too. So for us to be recognised is very important. I think that that is a high point, and we have to go on from that. Sometimes it's a couple of steps forward and one back though. So all our professions need to do the change and to coordinate and work together.
And the American psychologists have now given an apology.
They have not given an apology. They have looked at our apology, and we think they have copied it very closely, but they actually have not delivered it.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to say, I'm not sure about new types of allied health professionals, Ian, but what I'd like to see is recognition of the different dimensions of practice that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people might engage in their role as psychologists or speech pathologists or physios. I know from social workers, you always miss someone out, don't you? That from our work with Aboriginal allied health assistants, that they worked in a really different way from non-Aboriginal allied health assistants. Their work, drew on their networks in the community, their families, their community knowledge. They translated what the non-Indigenous allied health practitioners were saying to patients into examples and contexts that were more easy for them to implement. And so I think a good first step actually is to acknowledge, value and reward that extra dimension of practice that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander allied health professionals bring to their work.
And I think Paula's example of that is about the cultural knowledge. A lot of these programs that probably go out in communities, people say to me, why weren't they a success? Who did you have? Did you have a health worker? Did you have an Aboriginal person with you? Oh, no. Well, there's your answer. So I think, Paul, the work you do in your community, that's very successful from a lot of the work you do yourself, and having that cultural knowledge and community knowledge of people in the community,
And I think the other big systemic issue is ensuring that we're able to create jobs and that jobs are going to be available for people. And you know, there's challenges across all workforces to ensure that we do have you know, dedicated spaces for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to get into, you know, because graduating's one thing, getting into meaningful employment is the other that we are continually working with in workforce development spaces. Well, any more questions or comments from any of the Poche Centre directors and staff? Other than Bo, put the pressure on them.
I might just say one other thing that's happening in Queensland. I don't know if people know much about it. I heard about it yesterday that in some Queensland schools, they're having speech pathologists, OTs, social workers are going in, working in the schools with the kids. And I think the sooner we do that, especially around trauma and other things, you know, Pat, the sooner we do this with our younger kids, it's just brilliant idea that's happening in Queensland. I can find some more information out. Donna was telling me about it, actually. And I'm not sure if anyone knows about that, but this needs to happen with our kids in school early, especially with our allied health professionals.
So we have students from all over come to John for all the remote thing, and they go out into the community.
Yeah, has to happen. Perfect.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
The schools and the kids and everyone just love it. Love seeing people coming there.
Okay, well, we won't labour because we have hit our cut-off time.
We've got a little video.
God, you're keen to get that video going. But I think, you know, we've been really exposed to 4 great speakers today that have gone across a whole range of issues in relation to allied health. I think there's a whole range of challenges that we still have to talk about. One of the ones I just saw his come back in Shane, or you might have been there all the time, but are you able to talk about what the South Australian Government's relationship is with Ngungkurri and engagement of them?
So the South Australian Government, particularly the SA Health, have engaged Ngungkurris as part of the practice within hospitals, in all hospitals in South Australia. So it's a welcome aspect of healthcare delivery, but also an approach that is sort of different from the conventional side of things, because the clients are requesting the Ngungkurri. And because we have a lot of the rural remote in Adelaide, that's where they see, in terms of their healthcare, their overall healthcare, their healthcare plan allows that. But that's, you know, supported from the health minister down to the staff in the wards.
And so does the Commonwealth pick up on that in funding, Ricky?
There is a certain element of that funding. I think they're also looking at where Medicare sits with the Ngungkurri side of things, and certainly earlier this year sitting on the MBS review with that Ray Lovett convened. Ngungkurris were certainly mentioned in the MBS review as well. Yeah. So
it is starting off. One of our Key Thinker forums just a couple of years ago was looking at contemporary medicine and treatment versus traditional medicine and treatment. So that's up on the website, on the Poche website, if you want to find out what the deliberations were at that forum. But that was held in Sydney, and you know, there were a range of, I think we had about 5 Ngungkurris had come along and presented, as well as other health professionals. And yeah, very, very enlightening. And I think AIDA's done a bit of work as well on Ngungkurri and traditional healers. But it is something that's worth you know, considering, and particularly if we can get the feds to recognise it through the MBS, then I think we've come a long way. So yeah, we've heard the speakers. We've been you know, enthralled by hearing Paul's story, and to know that, you know, our investment, that what we do in Poche and what we do in each of our centres, our universities, is really preparing the next generation, and you know, those who are yet to come, and to be the leaders and take us forward. Allied health is critical in the whole health journey. Yeah, we're seeing the big areas of disability and ageing that we haven't really touched on, but we've got 2 Royal Commissions out there, and their findings, when they report back later in the year and early next year, I think are going to really pick up on workforce needs in both those sectors. And you know, that creates opportunities, but it also is a stark reminder of how far we've got to go. And particularly the further you get from a major centre, the more difficult it is to get qualified and skilled workers to be able to work within our communities. So we have a role to play in that. They're the sort of issues that we will pick up and report back in the Poche opinion piece. But can I ask us again to recognise our panel? Thank you for all of that.